Hello and welcome to ATARC's After Lunch IT webinar series. This week on Wednesday. Today, IT topic experts will be focused on discussing how to create and implement successful IoT security strategies within the federal government. These thought leaders will be discussing and exploring the art of the possible in IoT use cases in the federal space, but also what can and needs to be done in order to prevent IoT cyber attacks like phishing, ransomware, and crypto mining. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I am the Working Group Program Manager here at ATARC, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's panel. I would like to welcome all of our attendees, and a special thanks to Patricia Chan, John Quarsick, and the rest of the Checkpoint team. They've truly been a great partner to us here at ATARC. This afternoon, we are going to hear from our panelists, which will be followed by a Q&A, where we will pop in a few poll questions as we go, and then answer your questions. So before we begin, I just want to encourage you all, the audience, to please submit your questions that you have in the Q&A section of this platform. We're going to be going through them during the panel, so please send them as we go. Please also remember to answer all of the poll questions as we go to ensure that you receive your CPE credits. I would now like to introduce our panelists. So if you could all come on camera, I'm going to call out your names and maybe you can give a little wave to the camera. First up, we've got John Garska, the Deputy Director of Cyber at the U.S. Department of Defense. We also have—
Yeah, hi, go ahead.
Oh, yes, that's right. John Garska is not going to be on camera today, but he is here. So thanks, John. We also have Katerina Megas, who is the Cybersecurity for IoT Program Manager at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Next, we have Janie Holcomb, who is the Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. We also have Franco Cappa, the Cybersecurity Advisor at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And last but not least, we have John Quarsick, who is the Regional Head of IoT Sales at Checkpoint Software Technologies. So really exciting panel, super excited to hear from you all today. And again, to the audience, send your questions in because we will definitely be prioritizing those. To kick us off with this panel discussion, I'd really like to go around and hear from each of our panelists a little bit of background, what you're working on as it relates to IoT and the topic of today's panel discussion, and anything else that you think would be of importance for our audience to hear about and learn a little bit more. So maybe if Franco could kick us off, please.
Sure, thank you. Appreciate also the invite to be part of the panel this afternoon. So I represent CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, which was established actually not too long ago in 2018. So we are a little over 2 years old. And the responsibility of CISA is in relation to critical infrastructure. So CISA is working, let's say, with 16 sectors that are considered critical infrastructure. As part of the critical infrastructure, of course, everything that it's used by critical infrastructure, it's fair game, so to speak. So IoT is also what we look at when we go out and perform assessments and help organizations in assessing or strengthening their security posture. My role, I'm in the field. So the CISA is organized in 10 regions, similar to FEMA, for those that are familiar with the FEMA model. So there are, 10 regions, and let's say, Washington area, Washington DC area is the region 3, the Mid-Atlantic area. It's considered region 3. And again, there are field forces that are in the field like myself, and then there is, of course, headquarters also functions that they help, organizations in or help, let's say, CISA performing its mission, which is, again, supporting, strengthening, and security, to some extent, critical infrastructure. Again, 16 sectors, and they all have some sort of IoT. And let's face it, everybody's gonna, even if you don't want it, it's gonna be there. So something that needs to be regulated, something that, CISA is looking at and working on. Something else that's probably not known by everybody is that CISA is also responsible for the .gov domain. So everything that it's under the .gov domain, it's actually the responsibility of CISA. So apart from helping, critical infrastructure, we also work, with the federal agencies in relation to protecting the .gov. If your NSA is protecting the .mil, CISA responsible for the .gov. And my role as a subject advisor again is helping and working with organizations in the critical infrastructure in understanding what they need, what they're looking for, what we can help, and all that. And my background is I was CISA for intergovernmental organization, Director of Security for higher education, and other responsibilities. I was also I worked as a consultant for a number of years. So I've been, let's say, in this business for over 2 decades so far. Hopefully I'll be around for a little longer.
Thank you for sharing with us, Franco. Next, I'd like to hear from John Garska.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, well, my name is John Garska. I'm the Director for Cyber in the newly created Chief Information Security Officer organization in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment. And in this role, I'm primarily responsible for cybersecurity policy for systems that are in the acquisition and sustainment process. We recently put out a DoDI on cybersecurity for use in the acquisition system. I've overseen the cyber vulnerability assessments for weapon systems and critical infrastructure that were directed by Congress. I'm involved in the process of doing mission level cyber risk assessments where we look at how critical infrastructure, how cyber attacks on weapon systems or critical infrastructure could impact DoD missions. And I'll talk a little bit about more about that later. We've pioneered the use of war games to really get at a better understanding of cyber risk to mission. And I look forward to participating in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to hear from Katerina next, please.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Kat Magus, or I go by Kat for those who, Katerina is a little long, it doesn't quite roll off the tongue. So I'm part of Nist. Nist, for those that don't know, we are a technical component of the Department of Commerce. We are non-regulatory for most of our work. The only caveat that I would put under that is when it comes to federal agencies and FISMA, the work of NIST in the area of cybersecurity is mandatory guidelines for federal agencies, which were made mandatory through A130, a memo issued by OMB. And I just provide that background for some of the context, as I think it would be helpful to describe both the program and some of the work that we've been working on recently at NIST. So my job is the IoT cybersecurity program manager at NIST. About 3.5 years ago, NIST asked me to stand up a program to look at all the work that we were doing, because NIST has been doing work in the IoT space going back many, many years. I think, we have work going on in the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence that is an FFRDC hosted within NIST. And we did a project on wireless infusion pumps back in 2018 and published implementation guides. So my job was to come in and look at all the work that we were doing and put together a cohesive strategy for all of that work, as well as look at where there are gaps and what we can do to fill it. So as part of kicking off that program, the first thing we started with was establishing some principles. We partner very closely with stakeholders, both from public and private sector. And we have kind of 4 guiding principles. And as we talk through the panel today, you'll see that those guiding principles kind of underpin most of our work. We see everything in IoT as it needs to be rooted in a risk-based understanding. One size is never going to fit all. We believe that the work that we do at Nist needs to remain at the outcome level, and we need to be able to articulate the outcomes we want to achieve and really allow the implementation to be determined in the right bodies, whether those be an SDO, whether those be in some industry group best practices. And we also think it's an ecosystem of things. And while there's a lot of discussion on devices, and we'll talk about that as well today, because I think the IoT Improvement Act is something that's top of mind for many people. Managing IoT cybersecurity risks is really about more than just the device. That you can't build all the security into the device. So we've been putting out a couple of publications at Nist over the past couple of years. The first effort we put out was targeting federal agencies. It's called Nist Ir 8228. And it really was about how do you take the RMF, if you're familiar with the RMF that most federal agencies are familiar with. And if you look at the cybersecurity framework, which has been broadly adopted outside of the federal government, but it's also required by federal agencies, we looked at those risk management frameworks and we said, okay, how does IoT change the risk? What's unique about IoT, and where are agencies who are looking to implement the RMF 853 controls, cybersecurity framework subcategories, where are they going to find challenges in achieving those outcomes because of what IoT and the constraints that IoT has and the risks that IoT brings to the table. And shortly after working on 8228, there were a couple of things that were happening. There was an executive order, 13800, that was published looking at securing federal agency networks. And it was in particular focused on botnet threats, but very quickly it was identified that one of the key components was really in having a sustainable and secure IoT product market. And that's when this, in combination with 8228, the program, decided to say, okay, well, what can we articulate about devices and what devices can do, how devices can support organizations and agencies as they look to achieve their outcomes, whether it be using the cybersecurity framework or the RMF. And so we've been looking at the device side for a while now. We have a couple of publications out there. We did recently put out a couple of SPs along with a catalog and another Nist Ir as well, which was very timely given the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act and the requirement for Nist to provide federal agencies with guidance on how to manage their IoT risks, as well as provide minimum requirements for IoT devices. And I think I'll say no more. I'll probably have ample opportunity to elaborate on some of that later on.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. And Jamie, love to hear from you next.
Sure. I'm Jamie Holcomb. I'm the Chief Information Officer at the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And as you can well imagine, I'm going through the same problems everybody else is. So we have our #1 priority to be cybersecurity. That doesn't just include IoT. Of course, we have an eye on IoT, but as I've stated before to my folks on the inside, mission first, people always. And if you look at the whole thing about people, I don't think we in the government prepare our folks well enough to take all the cyber challenges that are coming in, including using their IoT devices. The problem I see is they don't even know how to use the regular things right now in a safe way. IoT is just going to accelerate or exponentiate that graph. So we really have to do a lot of internal training without PowerPoints. We have to gamify what I think should be good security training for our cybersecurity. That's all I got.
Thank you. And our other John Corsick.
Morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I'm John Corsick. I work for Checkpoint, one of the largest security providers in the world, and I'm an IoT evangelist. So let me hold up this card here, 27, 43, 3.5. 27, 43, 3.5. What do those numbers mean? That's 27 billion IoT devices that we have now today. 43% of those devices are connected to the internet. And that means globally 3.5 devices for every human being on the planet. This is a massive problem. I'm talking to you from my home in Atlanta, and I did a survey real quickly of how many IoT devices I have in my home. I got 17. I mean, from the Nest, thermostat to the Ring security to the LG, TV that you see back there to the Alexa, all of it. Now, I'm lucky I have a firewall built in and I work for a firewall company, but you're not that lucky. And if I was to ask you this question, how many unsecured devices do you have in your agency, in your organization? How many? Do you know? Are you sure? So that's the questions you two should ask right away. I love what Jamie said about people, process, and tech. So people and process are really the foundation. Tech is the enabler or the disabler. So what we want to talk about today is how we use technology to basically fight off the bad guys. And the equation is very simple. Think about it. Security is just this. It's ones and zeros protecting ones and zeros. However, that can be life-changing and it can be life-threatening. So how we do that, the process we go about that, the technology we put in place, and the policies we put in place are really the most important things. So hopefully we'll be able to flesh some of that out here in this discussion. And I'll turn it back over to Kirsten. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you guys for sharing those insights with us. And just for the folks at home, remember, if you have any questions based off what you've heard so far, feel free to put that in the chat for us. But we are going to pop up one of our first poll questions for today. So Alyssa, if you could please put that on the screen, and panelists, feel free to answer. But folks at home, we really want to hear from you. It's really good to get an idea of the landscape, and you'll also get your credit for being here if you answer them. So first poll question, in your estimation, how many of the IoT devices are connected to your agency's network without IT's knowledge? So shadow devices. And you have quite a few options here. All IoT devices are managed by the security team. Most of them, more than half of them, about half, less than half, or a small minority, or you're not sure. That is one, and we actually have a double whammy poll question. We've got number 2 is, are more regulations needed to address the security concerns of IoT devices? Yes, no, or I am unsure. So go ahead and take a moment and please answer that for us. And then Alyssa will pop up the results, and then we will move on to our first question of the day. Okay, lots of unsure people. And then for the second one, are more regulations needed to address the security concerns of IoT devices? It looks like a hard yes is the answer for that. So maybe we can start off with a security question then, just based off the poll. In terms of security surrounding IoT, where do you see the biggest vulnerabilities and challenges to focus on? So maybe John Garska, would you like to answer this one for us? John Garska? I can repeat it too if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead, repeat it and then bring up my diagram, please.
Okay, Alyssa, if you could please put the diagram up. The question was, in terms of security surrounding IoT, where do you see the biggest vulnerabilities or challenges to focus on?
Well, I'm clearly answering this from a DoD perspective. And in the diagram that you have up, you can see where we talk about in the department about this mission stack, where we've got missions at the top. We've got weapon systems that keep and that help enable missions. We have traditional DoD networks. That's the traditional IT. We've got DoD critical infrastructure that we depend on. And then there's commercial critical infrastructure that we leverage. And a lot of our stuff gets built by the industrial base. So traditionally, when we talk about, for purposes of today's discussion, when I talk about Internet of Things, I'm primarily talking about the operational technology that our critical infrastructure depends on. And so we face multiple challenges in that area. We've got a lot of buildings, a lot of control systems. For our most important infrastructure, we've done cyber vulnerability assessments over the past couple of years. Some of those are ongoing. One of the big challenges that we face is helping mission owners understand the cyber risk to their mission. In many cases, the infrastructure that our missions depend on is old. The primary function, the focus has been availability, and if it's not broken, they don't necessarily want to fix it. And so we've got a little bit of a cultural challenge to face in terms of helping people understand that there are cyber vulnerabilities. You don't have to read the paper too often to understand that that one can attack critical infrastructure and the control systems that enable that critical infrastructure. And so, my biggest challenge is helping senior decision makers understand the nature of the risk that exists to missions as a result of potential cyber attack, and then motivating people to make in many cases, the large investments that are required to secure our most important missions from cyber attack to critical infrastructure. So that's what I'd like to say for now. Thank you.
John, this is John Korsick from Checkpoint. I got a question for you. Would this be a better way to approach top down, put the policies on top and then bring it down? Or would it be better to have the people that are actually on the ground who are actually doing things and kind of do this from the bottom up? What's your thoughts on that? And then I got it probably, it's a baited question, but I just want to see what your thoughts are.
I think that our experience has been that policy is important. We have policy. What we have found is that cybersecurity is hard. It's highly capable cybersecurity professionals are a low density, high demand asset, and that governance is, without governance, policy is only so useful. And my experience has been that even with governance, you have to, in many organizations, and I'm not going to name names, but most organizations have reasonably, and in some cases, highly competent CISOs that focus on the middle layer of the stack, the network layer. Yeah. But when you start talking about, weapon systems or, operational technology that's in infrastructure, whether it's DoD infrastructure or critical infrastructure in the commercial sector, it's a different skill set. And many organizations struggle with how to provide governance for that part of the stack, because the traditional CISO organization is not necessarily man-trained or equipped to deal with that part of the attack surface.
It's a great answer. So it just occurred to me while you were talking, that, part of it needs to be hybrid. You do need to have policies coming down, but I also think that we need to take a Japanese philosophy, Kaizen, and use that philosophy to bottom up. If anyone's familiar with an automotive manufacturer called Toyota, Toyota at one point had no market share. And what they did on the assembly line, and this is an analogy, obviously, is that they allowed people to stop the assembly line and make improvements right then and there. And that's how Toyota actually had incremental improvement in their products and how they rose to be a major player. I think that we need both. We need the policies coming from top down, but we also need the people that are actually responsible on the ground who are working with this stuff, especially in the DoD with a lot of equipment, a lot of operational efficiencies to do bottom up as well. I think there has to be enablement both ways to make this work.
Thank you. So what do our other panelists say? I know we've got, the DoD perspective there. What about on the civilian side? Any thoughts surrounding, the things that you guys are looking at as it comes to IoT security and the challenges?
Yeah, if I may actually maybe comment, and I appreciate actually both Johnson's comments. The CISA is cybersecurity infrastructure security. So, and actually the IoT usually also, or OT as John was referring to, the operational technology, brings the physical aspect into the cyber, right? And so the CISA is definitely working on trying to bridge that gap. So because it's true that most of the, let's say, CISO level, CISO type functions are usually considered technical, functions. So they're usually under a CIO, and probably Jamie can speak, to that. But the CISO role at the end of the day is not really an IT function per se, right? So it has to understand the overall business model, if you will. So understand how the business works. So it should be, the different. It's not higher or lower. It's just a different level, with the higher visibility for sure. And I mentioned, the name, CISA's name, because again, the IoT brings that a cyber physical, right, equation, if you will. And that is, I think, what's important to also focus on. And that is what CISA is trying to do. So as a matter of fact, recently we came out with a white paper, if you will, that talks about that, bridging that gap. So trying to make sure that the two functions, what is usually considered, a CSO, a chief security officer, and a CISA, chief information security officer, kind of work together in concert. They don't have to be one person, but they have to work together to understand both the issues that come, let's say, from a cyber and physical, or what a cyber can do. And we have seen recently also with the incident at the water company in Florida. This was actually a small, or what we consider probably a script kiddie, right? So not an APT type, so an advanced, if you will, a hacker, but someone that just, playing, was able to possibly have a huge impact, by contaminating the water. And through cyber means. So that's why the importance of absolutely looking into the technology, looking at, and all these aspects, but also making sure that we understand that the IoT is bringing, some physical, possibly, physical impact to these. So it's not so much just getting a blue screen to that, that we were used to in the past, with Microsoft, but more, possibly an actual impact. And I always use the example of the insulin pumps that people are carrying in their bodies. Now you can actually control those, with your telephone. So if I hack your telephone, you're not going to have a good day. So, that has a very physical, and we could go on and on, with the refrigerators or HVAC systems and so on and so forth. Something else I'm going to throw there, and maybe we'll talk later, is especially during this pandemic time, we we all, I think, gather even more gadgets that we had in the past. And among those, the Alexas and Siris and so on and so forth. And now we are having most of our meetings home, and then possibly we can bring that up, to the whole world, if those systems eventually are hacked. So I'm going to stop here because I know there's a lot to talk about, but definitely wanted to bring up that cyber physical perspective, if you will.
Jamie, did you want to comment on that too?
Sure. Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts. I guess the first thought that I'd like to share with everyone is I'm not paranoid. I know everybody is trying to get me. So as long as we approach everything with that in mind, you have to assume that nothing is secure. And I think that's sort of the design of zero trust, but let's put that out of the way for a second. When you say nothing can be trusted, well, then how do you work? How do you get that out there? A lot of the IoT devices that we're talking about, what we're really trying to figure out is if it can have an IP address, it's addressable. You can get to it. That doesn't mean it's smart. So then you're saying, well, how do you relate to that IP address? How can you figure out what it understands and what it knows about its own surroundings? So if you assume that it's a dumb device, which you probably should assume, you should assume that somebody behind that device can then break into your area. So, I mean, we talk about catfishing all the time, right? I mean, it's a cool little show on MTV. I mean, but the real thing about catfishing is IoT is going to catfish everybody because it's going to pretend that it's an HVAC system with just on and off. And all of a sudden, what you're going to have is somebody controlling your other units if you don't secure that down. Okay, so then you talk about how do you secure it from a core infrastructure moving out to the edge. You can quarantine, you can containerize. BlackBerry RIM does it very well with cell phones, right, on the mobile device. We can put anything out there and we can be assured you can't take a screenshot of it, you can't cut and paste, you can't move from one environment to the other. So that's an idea about how not to trust any device out there. But it still doesn't go for the air gap. The air gap will always be there. Somebody can take a picture of your phone with all that information on it and then do an OCR on that text. And all of a sudden, what was thought to be secure is now unsecure. You'll always have that air gap. You'll always have certain things that you assumed were okay, but they're not. So the biggest thing with IoT, throw away all the assumptions and start from scratch and realize everybody is out to get you.
Thank you, Jamie, for those insights. Kat, I have a question for you. So from your agency's perspective, how does the federal government have sufficient or are they lacking in IoT security regulations and standardization? And I know you have an interesting perspective coming from Nist and the guidance that has been developed. So I'd love to hear from you on that.
Thanks. So we don't necessarily have insights into what federal agencies are doing or whether federal agencies are doing enough. I can probably speak to the multiple workshops that we've had over the past couple of years on this topic. So I think there's a lot of existing guidance that federal agencies already have, and the feedback really has been confirming so far that a lot of the guidance, like the RMS, is all very applicable still. And I was listening to some of the other speakers talk, and I think there are some adjustments that might need to be made within federal agencies. For example, more and more building automation systems are using connected technologies, right? And I'm not sure whether agencies have the institutional processes in place that when they acquire a HVAC system and it's connected, that it automatically is assumed that it's going to go through the FSMA process and through all the RMF processes, and that they're going to have to put together a system security plan as they separately acquire a smart thermostat, or as they separately acquire perhaps sensors that they want to connect into the building automation system, right? That those will have to comply with Nist guidance that we're working on right now around the minimum requirements for those devices. So I think agencies have a lot of existing guidance that they can use. There's new guidance, as I mentioned, that we're working on. You know, here's a plug for our workshop. If you're a federal agency or if you're a manufacturer and you want to provide your input and be able to inform the guidance, we are having a workshop next week to go over the public comments we received on that. I think one of the other things that we're seeing as well, and another theme that I've been hearing from federal agencies, is that a lot of the tactics or a lot of the strategies that we used in the past to mitigate risks just aren't working for IoT devices. And so I think it was at the last workshop, actually, I think we had somebody on one of our panels from DoD as well, and he was just saying less and less. It's not that I have a choice to say I'm going to acquire devices that don't have connectivity in order to mitigate that risk. You just cannot find devices on the market that don't have connectivity. Also, more and more, microsegmentation was something that we had heard about historically as a good way to mitigate the risks associated with IoT. More and more we're hearing that just in many cases, just because of the way the manufacturers have built the device, because of the intended use of the device, the features of the device, the functionality that it brings, microsegmentation isn't always a viable approach. So I think that's again, it's not so much that I don't think that the agencies have the tools. I think it is looking at how we may have to revisit, and again, this is what I do, I plug our work. 8228 goes into a lot of that, where what we identified was over 30 assumptions that we identified that agencies and other organizations make about how they can secure these devices, and how IoT likely breaks those assumptions, and why federal agencies might have to go back and revisit those specific areas and say, well, I might have to change it up, and I might have to approach security a little different for these things.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. So I think it's time for our next poll question. Alyssa, if you could please pop that up for us. And again, reminding the audience at home, please go ahead and answer, as well as send in any questions that you may have. This poll question is, where does your agency stand in terms of implementing an IoT security solution? So you have already finished, just begun, plan to implement, no plans to implement, or you're not sure. Go ahead and take a moment to answer that. And then the next one is, should vendor manufacturers of IoT devices be required to push security updates and patches? Yes, no, or you are not sure. Go ahead and take a moment to answer if you're at home, please, or any of our panelists, feel free to answer. And then Alyssa, when you feel like we're ready, go ahead and put that up on the chat. So it looks like for the first one, not too many people are sure. And for the second one, should vendor manufacturers of IoT devices be required to push security updates and patches? It looks like most people are in agreement of yes. Is that how our panelists feel? Do you feel that this is necessary and important? John, you came off mute. Looks like you want to answer that.
Yeah, the most important, well, John, you want John
Korsick, and then John Garska, if you want to add on after.
The most important thing is you can't protect it if you don't know what you have. So I would say to everyone that's out there, quite frankly, you need to do some discovery. And there are technologies out there that you can basically plug in to your network. They're non-obtrusive. They don't have agents. And it will not only capture the network traffic going north-south, but it'll catch you east-west as well. And that's the first thing you got to do. You can't protect what you don't know. Once you have that information, which is pretty powerful, it'll be an eye-opener. So quite frankly, I mean, do you leave it to the guises of the manufacturers? Nope. There's an old saying, God helps those who help themselves. So if I'm a CISO, I want to know what's on my network. I want to know what's there. I'm not going to leave this up to someone else to help me make that decision.
Yep. And John Garska, did you want to chime in as well?
Sure. What we have found is that, as I highlighted previously, in many cases, there's a workforce challenge where the workforce that we have is responsible for keeping the systems that they have operating, and you know, we're in the process, and it varies by service and organization of standing up the workforces that are required to actually do the securing. We have some organizations in DoD that are extraordinarily capable, and then there are some that are not so. And so we know that we face significant challenges hiring government workforce to do control system cybersecurity. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. So we do have an audience question I want to get to. Craig Compiano asks, OT has availability requirements that preclude autonomous updates, patches from the MFG. How does the panel suggest this requirement to be addressed? Any insights from our panelists on this question?
If I may chime in for a moment?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so a couple of things here, and it's a great question, and that is pretty much the case for most of the OT devices and environments where, you know, so what you cannot, let's say, patch, you have to mitigate. There are not many other, let's say, way arounds, right? So, and I always say also, if you don't need something, don't use it, right? So that's me, right? That's Franco saying that, not necessarily the CISA or the government. So meaning, let's try to limit, you know, the scope of what you have. And from the same token, so if you don't need to have that exposed to the internet, you know, try to air gap that as much as you can. So you, let's say, take it out of scope, so it doesn't need to be, you know, a major concern, if you will. So those are, you know, kind of two comments. I'm just gonna briefly also mention, you know, and John Quarcy before was talking about discovering. So part also what we do as an agency, of course, we are, you know, publishing monthly vulnerabilities that are, you know, in devices. So that's something that we do as part of our mission. But also we help, you know, with assessment. We help with, especially also in relation to the governance side, right? So not just from a technical perspective, but also understanding. So how resilient are you as an organization? And that is true for IoT, is true for IT, is true for OT, and so on and so forth. Meaning that is your governance / processes side of it. So not so much from a technical perspective. And that is part of what we do, especially as field forces. We go out and work with organizations in both, you know, public and private sectors, getting that understanding. So helping organization understanding how resilient they are and their security posture, and help them strengthen the security posture. So to, you know, I know it's a longer answer that maybe was needed, but I wanted to make sure that first of all, you know, the first part was addressed. So mitigation, where you have to just focus on, and possibly also, you know, limiting the scope as much as you can, and also, I guess, tagging along to what, you know, was said before, making sure that you understand what your risks are, you know, what your vulnerabilities are, and you know how prepared you are, you know, to situations, to incidents. So your resilience, if you will, and that is also where we can help as an agency, both public and private sectors.
Well, I'll take 1 second on this. ICS, industrial control systems, are things like water purification in municipalities, manufacturing. And a lot of these things have been made by companies like Rockwell and Siemens and Honeywell. They have what they call PLCs. That's programmable logic controllers. And these are what run the machinery. Guess what? A lot of what these have old operating systems, and they have embedded, chips in them, and you can't update this stuff. You can't. So the first thing you got to do is you got to know what you have. So you do discovery, okay? You use tools that Checkpoint provides and others that, identify all these things. And then you put the policies in place using mitigation. Whether it's air-gapped or not is not the discussion, because what we're seeing is air-gapped networks still communicating with networks. And guess what?
Absolutely.
That's where it gets intertwined, and that's how the hacks happen.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else from the panel want to chime in before we move on?
This is Kat. I was just going to make a quick remark. I found the response to the polling question interesting. I'm not sure if folks are aware, but GAO did a report on federal agency use of IoT technologies. And I think it was published even last year. And I can't remember exactly how many agencies they surveyed, but I think it was about 75% of agencies that did respond that they were currently using IoT technologies in their federal agency. So I thought that was interesting that when I looked at the responses to the polls, you may all not be aware of how much IoT is actually already underway in your federal agency. I mean, I think it is absolutely here to stay. And, on the topic of secure updates, that is a topic that was one of the very early on things that we struggled with. So NIST has published a set of recommendations, 8259, 8259A. They're called Core Cybersecurity Baseline for IoT devices. And we identified both a process framework for manufacturers that we recommend that they follow, but also we've identified some core cybersecurity capabilities for IoT devices, and one of those was secure updates. And that was one of the ones that garnered probably the most discussion. And I know here we're talking about, the industrial use of IoT devices, but when we were addressing the core baseline, we were talking about consumer devices. And, one of the topics there is if I have a connected smoke alarm, or I may not want secure updates, or I may want secure updates to be applied in such a way that they can gracefully fail. Because from a security perspective, the last thing I want, a safety perspective, the last thing I want is for a secure update to actually cause that smoke alarm to fail. And from their perspective, safety was their primary concern. And that's one of the things we struggle with, right? How do you balance the need for security and secure updates and safety? Reliability comes up in the industrial control system space, and safety. Again, if you're talking about an embedded, pacemaker that's connected, you probably do want that secure update, but you want to be able to have it occur only when a patient is in the office. And if for any reason that secure update has some sort of issue, that the patient is actually in a place where they can have a doctor immediately address the issue. So it is a very complicated topic. I just did want to acknowledge, and that's part of why we've always said, one size is not going to fit all. Each market, each sector is probably going to have to identify for themselves how it's best to address that. Because again, an industrial control system, embedded heart pacemaker, they're not going to be the same. So thanks, Kirsten.
Thank you. No, super interesting stuff. So let's go ahead and knock out our third and final poll question for the day so everyone can get their credits. How vulnerable do you think your agency's devices are to security breaches from a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being vulnerable, 5, sorry, how did I do this? 1 being not vulnerable at all, vulnerable, it's a difficult word to say, to 5 being extremely vulnerable? And the second part of that polling question is, are basic cyber hygiene practices sufficient to address security and resilience risks of IoT devices? Yes, no, or you are unsure. Let's go ahead and take a moment to answer. Then we can go ahead and see those results and maybe chat about them. So whenever you feel like we're ready to see those results, we'll go ahead and put them up on the screen. Okay, so looks like most people are neutral for the first one, and then they think no for the second one. Panelists, what do you guys think about this? Does this surprise you? Or is it in line with your thinking as well?
The second one is surprising.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, they're not very different. You know, IoT is not, I mean, of course, there is some differences, but, well, there are some differences. But for the most part, you know, basic hygiene cover, you know, most of the concerns. So are there many that don't believe it's sufficient? That is surprising to me.
Mm-hmm. Jamie, how about you?
I wonder.
Oh, go ahead, Kat. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay, Coach. I was just going to say, I wonder if that response may be in part the dynamic that we discovered when we first started exploring the area of IoT, and we started looking at it from a system level view or from an enterprise risk management perspective. And at the end of the day, what we heard was, in some cases, there's just certain limitations of these IoT devices. They're either constrained due to power, or they're constrained due to processing power, or they are constrained in what functionality they offer, and how much I, as a system administrator, actually have visibility into what's going on in the device. And in some cases, if the device doesn't offer, for example, a unique identifier, I may not have a good way to do asset management, because out of the box, this device just doesn't have the functionality. So I wonder if it's a little bit of that, and that's why some respondents said that following your cyber hygiene may not be sufficient, because IoT does introduce some constraints to the way you as a federal agency can actually manage your risks. Just speculating.
Oh, that makes sense. And Jamie, did you have anything you'd like to add?
We've talked about so much, I want to be pointed in my answer. About what?
Well, so we can discuss those results, but my next question, and maybe you can kick us off with this, is do you have any major IoT use cases at your agency that you could speak to, both in support of mission delivery and citizen interaction, or anything of that nature?
Well, sure. I mean, what we're trying to do is actually provide the ability to apply for a patent or a trademark over any mobile device. And that is a vision that's hard to achieve. And so because of that, we're trying to move to the cloud, and we're also trying to provide systems that citizens, anyone, can use. I don't want to be behind, but hey, it is what it is. We are behind. Our technology is probably a decade behind what it needs to be. But at the same time, we still have defense in depth. And when we move out to the cloud and provide those citizen services to apply on any device, we're going to have that zero trust. I don't trust anybody. And so you're only going to be able to do your application. And our current way about things is not that way. We have a very trusting environment in the design or the architecture of our prior. And the only way we've been able to secure it is to put these big moats and, make sure we have all this defense in depth. And we can't do that in the new internet age. So the use case is, hey, I want to apply from anything, even my TV if I wanted to, but we're not there yet.
Thank you for sharing that. Any of our other panelists have any use cases at their agency in support of mission delivery and citizen interaction that they would like to share? All right, moving on to the next question. What are some lessons learned and success stories that can be shared from any successful IoT security strategies? John Corsick?
Well, sure, one anecdote. So we have a very large customer, retailer. They have 2,200 stores in North America. Their initials are THD, so you can figure that out. So they deployed Discovery, and this is what they found. In Alabama, they found that they had 9 Xboxes hooked up to their network. Their employees were using them, during breaks and whatnot. And all those Xboxes had old operating systems. In Bellevue, Washington, they found another store where people were actually doing YouTube videos on the point of sale systems. Literally, as we were doing the discovery with THD, one of the security guys literally got up in the middle of the meeting and go, I got to go. I mean, that's how serious this is. I mean, they didn't even know. So my point is that we, as a company, Checkpoint, can offer a IoT assessment to your company or agency for free. That is my favorite color, by the way. Free is my favorite color. So, but we can and help you start this journey. So if in fact you are interested, get a hold of me and we can see what we can do to help you on, at least on the discovery phase, and see what you have.
Great, thank you. Any of our other panelists want to chime in on lessons learned, success stories we've not yet mentioned when it comes to successful IoT security strategies? Kat, you just came off mute. Does that mean you want to share anything about that?
So I was thinking about your question, and yeah, because I'm not involved in the operational side, I probably don't have my own kind of anecdotes. But I do want to say, just looking at IoT and as it being a space that we've been looking at for the last 3.5, 4 years, I think we are seeing a trend where security is being talked about a lot more. I think that's very positive. I think we're seeing a lot of voluntary adoption in the marketplace, and we do see manufacturers themselves that are looking for more guidelines and more guidance on how to build and provide more secure devices to the marketplace, which again is just part of the solution. It's not the solution. It's going to require lots of pieces and parts. But I think we are seeing a lot more discussion in this area. And I see retailers and some of the kind of big box companies that are starting to get very interested in this. So I think there's a lot of positive trends in this space. So I don't know if that's necessarily a success story. Obviously, this is cybersecurity, and there will always be something we'll have to be looking at tomorrow. But I think as far as seeing things headed in the right direction, I feel that they are.
Good. Awesome to hear. Thank you. So thank you guys for sharing all of this information and these insights and great questions from the audience at home. I think for the last couple of minutes, we should do a rapid fire round. Each panelist, let's go around and have you all share anything you want to leave the audience with, whether it be something tangible advice they can bring to their agency, or a book, a quote, anything that inspires you, whatever it may be. Franco, if you could kick us off with that.
Sure, thank you. Again, I appreciate the opportunity, to also bring the CISA perspective here, right? And something that probably it's important also to understand that CISA, for the most part, is a non-regulatory organization, so we don't go out to other organizations, both private and public, but we help organization. And John used the word free. I always prefer to use the word no cost, for organizations, because it's taxpayer money. So that's the difference there. But something to look at. There's tons of actually web information in the CISA.gov website on the DHS. Anyways, one initiative is called the Cyber Physical System Security, or a CPSSec, that talks about IoT and all the implications that we briefly talked about before. So definitely look at the capabilities that are out there. Happy to assist an organization, both public and private sectors, in their strategy. I guess you asked a question before, any success story, I guess it's too early to understand if it's a success, right? So we need to mature a little bit more to understand what is a success and what is not, maybe. But definitely get a wealth of information. There's good, let's say, talking about, IoT and what is needed. So hopefully that will get us, it will help us, let's say, catching up with what we need to catch up with. But again, appreciate the opportunity to be here and happy to entertain any questions separately also. And feel free to share my information with the people that are on the call. And if they need a specific question about what CISA can help with, I'd be happy to do that. Thanks again.
Thank you. We appreciate that. And John Kwarcik?
Visible world is larger than the visible world. Just remember that always. The invisible world is larger. You can't manage what you don't see. You cannot. So my point here is hit me up. We will do an assessment for you. We will help with the visibility factors. And I'm here to, have a further conversation. So I'm at your disposal. You can find me. And thank you for the time today.
Sounds good. Jamie Holcomb?
Sure. One of the things I want to leave everyone with is the fact that in order to make things lasting in people's heads, you have to engage them and make it personal. So what we're trying to do with our cybersecurity training is get away from the PowerPoint slides and into the gamification. And what is that? Make it fun for them to choose the different paths to go down when you're training them not to press links. And if they actually do press a link, require some remedial training. Maybe even incentivize some people. Hey, this guy was 100%. This lady did her job and she was exemplary. Try to make those things gamified. Try to make them fun so that people remember, and it's a constant vigilance. If you think it's a one and done, you're wrong, because there's new attacks all the time. Our profile, our surface area is just increasing. And the more that increases, the more attacks are going to come.
Awesome. Thank you. And John Garska?
Yeah, I think that, depending on the maturity of your organization and where you are, to get to good, you have to be able to tell a story. You have to be able to help senior decision makers and people that write the checks understand, the risk that exists and the bad things that can happen if you don't mitigate your control systems. It's a different skill set than understanding how things work at the 1s and 0 level. But if you can't tell that story, you can have a good strategy, but you can't implement it because you don't have the funding to do it. Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate.
Thank you. And Kat, take it away, please.
So I love what John just said, and I made a note of that, and we absolutely believe that's absolutely right. And a lot of our work actually is hoping to articulate a lot of that, make the business case. We've been talking about that a lot internally at Nist, and we're saying we can lean on, regulations and requirements as much as anybody wants to. But at the end of the day, though, it really has to be about selling the business case and making sure that you have the funding and you have the buy-in for your project. But before I go, I do want to plug the work that we are doing. And if you are a federal agency, or if you support a federal agency, or if you are a manufacturer of devices and are interested in the federal market as a market for yourself, you should be looking at the Nist work. It's SP 800-213. It's word of mouth. I think this is slowly getting around, but there was law that was passed last year that is making it mandatory for federal agencies to only procure devices that are going to comply with the guidance we're currently working on. So please, we are looking for feedback and input. We've been through one round of public comments. We're working through about 600 comments. I hear, compared to 800-53, I heard they received over 5,000 comments. So I count myself lucky that we only have 600. But we are having a public workshop. We are interested in what people have to say, because we really want to put out guidelines, and understanding that they are mandatory for federal agencies. We want them to be something that manufacturers can actually build to, that federal agencies can actually use and take advantage of, and overall is something that actually provides value. So that's my plug, and hopefully there will be some crossover, and I'll hear from some of you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. These conversations are so important to have. Really looking forward to, when we can all meet in person one day as well. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you to our audience. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I want to thank our partners again at Checkpoint and you all. Thanks for joining us today. We hope to see you again next week on Thursday for another webinar. Here we will be having a discussion focused on how the workplace of April 2021 looks dramatically different than the workplace of March 2020. No kidding, huh? Join this event to hear how a human-centric approach to managing employee services can inform and shape the rollout of new systems and processes to support today's workforce. So we hope to see you there. Everyone have a great rest of your week.